Well, good evening. We have got a group of panelists here to talk with you tonight. This is Prove All Things, where it's a Bible discussion program on the Word of God. These guys have been talking politics before we went on the air, but they can't do that for an hour. We're going to talk about the Word of God. There's a panel of preachers here to deal with your questions or comments. We're taking our passage from 1 Thessalonians 5. Prove all things, hold fast that which is good, and abstain from all appearance of evil, and the very God of peace sanctify you wholly. I pray, God, your whole spirit and soul and body be preserved blameless unto the coming of the Lord Jesus. This program is brought to you by the High School Road Church of Christ, 3103 North High School Road here in Indianapolis, Indiana. You can participate in this. We want you to participate in this. I happen to be looking at my iPhone right here, and you can, there's a live chat button down at the bottom of it. You can click on that, and you'll be on the air with us. And we'll go from there. This program, we're at 257-3000 here locally. And 1-800-423-2484. You can reach us on those phone numbers. And we're looking forward to hearing from you. I think Pancho, my engineer, is having difficulties. He always has difficulties. Probably we got too many people on tonight, Pancho. But we're going to give it a whirl. We'll just about interrupt anything to deal with your question or comment, but tonight what we're going to deal with, we have a segment here where you or our various callers or listeners or whatever send us a let me get this thing going here, Pancho. Let me see what we got. Let's see which I can't. Pancho's having a little trouble, so I'm not exactly sure what we got out on the air right now. I'm on? Okay. I don't know what's on, but anyway, here we are. I'm so confused.
Is it true?
Is it true? Is that true? That's this segment that we want to do here. And what we're looking for is, in future weeks, if you hear something from a preacher, read something from a preacher, they're on the TV, they're on the radio, they're on YouTube. There's 1,000 of them on YouTube. Send us a clip or send us some reference to it. If you wonder, is that true? Is it accurate? So we've got one of those tonight. And let's see if I can get everything done here. We're going to talk about it. One of our listeners sent us this, and it is an article entitled Evolution. I'm going to fix that before I put it on here. Everybody's going to think we're knuckleheads and can't spell the word evolution, but I fixed that 3 times today, I think. And now we'll try one more time. Okay, I think we're going here. Evolution, the big and small of it. This is from a magazine called The Skeptical Inquirer, and you can see the headline up here: Why do educated people doubt evolution? And then a subhead: The big and small of it. And so we're looking forward to talking with you about this. We're going to talk about this article a little bit and see what kind of response you can give to us about that. We hope that you'll be participating with us, and soon, and we'll go from there. This is me, but Ron Milliner, what about this article? What do you think about it?
You going to introduce us first, or are we just going to go?
Oh, excuse me, I didn't tell everybody who my guests are. I know so well. This is Ron Milliner. Ron, we got folks from all over the country. Ron is from Virginia, and I'm going to think of that town you're in, Rutherglen? Rutherglen in Virginia. Ron's been preaching for an awful long time. Our other guest here, we'll show him. This is Brother Jeff Asher, who's in a short sleeve shirt with the air conditioner on, sweating, he says. And he's down in Houston, Texas. And we're very glad to have him with us as well. And I don't know, Pancho, if we can get our other guest, Alan McKee, who's behind me here. And we're switching him. There he is. How are you doing, Alan?
I'm doing well.
Okay. All right. Now I got everybody introduced. Excuse me. Ron, start with me, for me, on this evolution, the big and small of it. I think we got a fairly extensive copies of it, so you might want to tell us which chart I've sent the copies out to you guys, so you might want to tell us which chart you want to go to. We'll let everybody else chime in.
Let's just go to the second chart. I thought we'd fix the feedback.
Yeah, you're not feeding back on us, so go ahead.
It's important, I think, for us to consider what this magazine article has to say, because if you look at slide 2, the new biology that's being taught in the high schools today is not dependent just on textbooks. In fact, this quote from an American biology teacher says that currently there are no textbooks that address reinventing life in a thematic way. Possibly course readings include news articles from Science, Nature, Scientific American, and other periodicals, as well as grade books such as The Evolution Explosion, Radical Evolution, and The Diversity of Life. And so you could very well expect your high school student who's taking biology to see articles like this one that we're going to be talking about here in a few minutes. And John, if you'll go to number 4, slide 4, this I think pretty well describes the basic issue that this writer is talking about. He says they acknowledge, and when he says they, he's talking about creationists. He says they acknowledge the existence of a phenomenon they call microevolution, but assert in the same breath their vigorous denial of another process that they refer to as macroevolution. The fact is that macroevolution distinction is one drawn without a difference, so he says. And yet when we look at the evidence that's offered in the biology textbooks for evolution, it's always what we refer to again as microevolution, small changes within a species. For example, if you look at number 5, that's the next one, John.
You mean 5 comes after 4?
Well, unless you're doing new math. You'll see this particular biology textbook uses Darwin's finches. Again, this is supposedly evidence for evolution. Well, do you see one species evolving to another one? No, you don't. The next one, slide 6, another biology textbook. This one uses rabbits, and they're, of course, everybody knows they're quick breeders. But you've got the idea of here of white rabbit, a rabbit, Arctic rabbit that coat may turn white, match in with the snow, but it's still a rabbit. The next slide from another biology textbook talks about the difference in normal red blood cells and sickle cells. The next one talks about the old peppered moth argument that evolutionists have used for years, but it's still a peppered moth, where you talk about the black ones or the white ones. So that's kind of what the individual is talking about in this article, trying to deny that, do away with the difference that does actually exist between microevolution and macroevolution. And I don't want to hog the show.
Hey, Jeff, tell us.
Jeff read the article as well, so let him maybe point out a few things.
Make it easy on our listeners and tell us What is microevolution? What is macroevolution? Tell us about it so we know what we're talking about a little bit.
You directing that to me?
Yeah, or anybody.
Well, even in the article, they say it's a distinction without a difference, and yet they full well understand that they cannot in any instance identify a series of microevolutionary changes, small changes within a species.
Well, what would be an example of a small change?
Well, look at dogs. All right, you've got dogs. We've got Australian Shepherds, and we've got Bulldogs, and we've got all these different kinds of dogs, and we use the word kind not in the biblical sense, but we have these different varieties of dogs, but they're not a different species. And that's the result of human manipulation through the process of breeding, which, we're all familiar with that when we were in high school and we studied about the sweet peas and so forth, and how sometimes they were white flowers and pink flowers and so on and so forth. But they're still sweet peas. They're still dogs. But now these authors want us to believe that there is, in the absence of any intelligence whatsoever, when you talk about developing varieties of flowers or varieties of dogs, that involves a human intelligence directing that process. But in the absence of any intelligence at all, these changes are supposed to occur in such a way that they result in superior and beneficial changes. And that is never what happens. That's never what happens in nature. The changes, generally, if they are left unattended or not directed, will result in a degeneration. And we look at humankind and we see birth defects or any of those things where there is actually the presence of not superior and beneficial changes, but if anything, every once in a while an inferior change crops up. We haven't found anybody that well, we've got lots of monkey bones and we got lots of human bones, but we don't have anything in between. And we don't have anything that's superior to humanity, according to their standards of superiority.
John, look at slide 14.
Okay. I'm a look.
All right.
There we go.
I didn't have Jeff's dogs, but we got bears.
Yeah, same difference.
And we can, we recognize there's a difference between a grizzly bear and a polar bear. And that, no doubt, environment had a little bit to do with that change in regard to the fact that polar bears would be more successful in an Arctic climate than they would be out in the woods somewhere. But if you go back to 13, the idea that dinosaurs turned into birds, there you're talking about different species. And so that's the difference between microevolution with the bears and different, really different type of animals in macroevolution.
All righty. Alan, what about this? Let's see if we can get you on here.
Well, I'll have to agree with Ronnie. It's macroevolution deals with changes, I think, within the constraints of the DNA. I think that one of the primary differences maybe we run into with the folks that want to believe that evolution is just sort of rampant is that they think that DNA is sort of infinitely plastic and can add all sorts of characteristics into it at any given time. And yet we find that even with the animals that we breed and have injected human intelligence into the breeding process, there are limits to what can be done. And we can breed various colorations, for example, of these animals. We can get animals with long coats or short coats, or we can get animals with big ears and short ears. And we can give, we think of what we've done with farm animals, for example. You get beef cattle versus dairy cattle and some of the variations there. But why don't we have, for example, a a 2,000-pound dog. People have been breeding dogs for a long time. Why don't we have a 2,000-pound dog? Wouldn't it be fun to have a dog to ride around the neighborhood? And the answer is the genome won't go there. The DNA simply won't go there. And to try and breed a 2,000-pound dog is a waste of time. The DNA simply won't take it there.
All righty. Ron, maybe I'm just simple and curious, but you've got a dinosaur here, and you said that they became birds. That's a different species. Is that what happened?
Well, that's what the evolution says. That'd be an example of macroevolution.
Okay.
And
did that happen?
That you don't have evidence of, but we can see in that next slide with the bears, we can see that microevolution change.
Okay. All righty. Where do you want to go from here?
Well, let's talk a little bit about his analogy. Go to slide 10. I think that's where it introduces it.
There you go.
He says, imagine that a blind man who has a walking stick with which to probe the terrain around him wants to locate a very small hill in the middle of the field. And so he talks about that illustration, and if you go to, let's skip down to number 16.
All righty.
And he draws out his analogy quite a bit. He talks about the fact that, you got this blind man, and because of the environment he's in, it'd be really hard for him to find that hill since he is blind. But if you took a blind man, which you see on the slide 60 on the right, and he had a longer stick, and he was in an environment where there's hills, well, he could use that longer stick. It'd be an advantage to him, so he could feel and decide which one was a slope and which slope was steeper, so that he could climb up the higher hill and reach the top of the mountain. But we're not talking about changes in just a little stick here. If you go to 17, really what the evolutionists
is that the stick is a microevolution that's going to lead to a macroevolution.
Yeah, well, it's a small change that's happened in his stick, but the guy really needs, a Google car on slide 17 to make the comparison, and that's macroevolution.
Okay.
The stick turns into a car.
I don't know why the guy just didn't evolve a pair of eyes and forget about the stick altogether.
Well.
All right.
All right. Well, the whole thing, and that's why I'm here. I'm the guy who goes for the absurd. The whole thing is absurd. The article. What people need to understand is that evolution is based upon basically the idea that it is survival of the fittest. That's the idea of natural selection, that the fit survive. And so then the gene pool keeps changing based on the better attributes being present, whether it's through the environment or it's through disease or whatever, and these better elements come to the top. But what they never talk about, and what you see throughout this article, is the failure to recognize intelligence. They talk about DNA as if DNA, at one point he even personifies it.
Look at chart 25.
Personifies DNA almost as if it's a human being. There's information in DNA, and I want to know where that came from. If everything is the result of just some big explosion where there was, and the idea of absolutely nothing, they have to assume the eternity of the universe, and then they have to assume that dead, lifeless, stupid, not even stupid, non-intelligent matter was able to program information into DNA, and then they act like this one little strand of DNA had all the information for all the different life forms, and if we just throw it in the right pool of goo, it's going to turn into a human being. And that's absurd.
Here's 25 up, Ronnie. What do you want to say about it?
Well, this gets to Jeff's point. He says in his article, talking about his analogy, he says, back to our analogy, when he feels an increasing terrain elevation in a given direction, our blind hiker will opt to move that way, correctly reasoning that this will eventually lead him to a local evolutionary peak. Under these conditions, he's much more likely to reach a peak, though not necessarily the highest peak in the area, long before his friend in the field finds his small hill. So where does this correct reasoning come in regard to evolution?
I couldn't make a better argument for God than this fella makes.
It's typical. It's typical. Look at what Darwin said in Origin of the Species. It's chart 27, John. He said, it may be said that natural selection is daily and hourly scrutinizing every variation, even the slightest, rejecting that which is bad, preserving and adding up all that is good, silently and insensibly working whenever and wherever opportunity affords.
You know, and then he makes that ridiculous argument. You know, there I go using probably a loaded term, but he talks about, he makes fun of the creationist who talks about irreducible complexity. Well, we recognize that in everything, and he wants to have the eye evolve into some organ that is not an eye, but that it will eventually become an eye, and yet it's useful. You see, they want to have it both ways. They want to have natural selection, which throws away the bad, and so here's an eye that can't possibly see, and yet somehow that's going to survive. That's contradictory to their theory. And
beyond that, this thing that doesn't work, he reasons out that it will work eventually if it just needs a little more mutations.
Yeah. And so we've got to have, and so here's this, we've got to have millions of years and the right environment. We've got to have a long enough stick to climb this hill so we can get to the right peak so our eye can evolve. It doesn't take a genius to realize this is some of the silliest nonsense. And people with reasoning ability have know that it is. And this is why they're so intent on keeping any mention of God or intelligent design or anything like that out of the schools. This is why they ridicule people who actually believe in it. I heard just the other day that the United Methodist Church, which is, you know, it's a denomination, and I don't support the United Methodist Church, but here is what at one time was regarded as an evangelical denomination in the United States, has actually forbidden a group to participate in their convention that they've been allowing to participate in times past. They're scientists, but they're refusing to allow them to participate on the basis of the fact that their literature argues for intelligent design. So here's a religious group. This is how things have changed so in over my lifetime. When I grew up in a neighborhood where everybody who went to any kind of church believed in God and believed that we were created, now you can't. You're anathema at the United Methodist Convention because you believe in intelligent design. You believe there was a God who created, and yet that's exactly what the Methodist Creed says in Article number 1.
All righty. I want to remind you that we'd like to have you join in. You can reach us on chat here on YouTube. If you'll just locate it, you'll find it there wherever you're watching. You can also reach us by phone at 257-3000, and you can reach us at 1-800-423-2484. We'd like to have you. We do have a comment on chat that we're going to go to as soon as I figure out a few things. Right now, a gentleman writes in, Gary says, if microevolution was the explanatory basis for macroevolution, there would be innumerable transitional forms as originally proposed by Darwin. If not, why not? Alan, why don't you take us off on that direction?
Yeah, Gary's got a point here, and a very good point. We ought to be then seeing all sorts of transitional forms. One of the textbook kind of images that were given, for example, human evolution shows chimpanzees evolving to a little more complicated form of man, and then maybe up to a Neanderthal man, and then or some other form, and then from there all the way up to modern man. And we look at that evolutionary, supposedly evolutionary progression, and we might reasonably ask ourselves the question: how come we have, say, millions of chimpanzees in the world, which I believe we do, and we have billions of humans in the world? Where are all these guys in the middle? Where are all these forms in the middle that are, the chimpanzees survived? Why couldn't these other forms survive?
Yeah.
Were they so poor in survival that they died out rapidly, and the chimpanzees somehow hung on?
Well, yeah, the chimpanzee, the lower form, hung on. The reasoned, that's what these fellows have been saying. This guy's arguing for reasoning. The intermediate forms, which were reasoning and deciding that these intermediate forms were better and more intelligent, they died out. So you kind of wonder what happened there. What happened to the intermediate forms? All right, Ronnie, I'm going to come back to you. What's next? What do you want to say?
Let's go to 19.
19. All right.
Another thing we talked about when we talked about evolution is how that it operates by chance, no purpose. But this fellow takes kind of the opposite view. He says the main error occurs at the very beginning as it happens. Again, the error in our reasoning. He says the picture of evolutionary blindness and aimlessness, which has been painted by so many modern religious apologists, is entirely wrong. Well, if that's wrong, he's got a lot of people he needs to correct. In the next slide, we can see he needs to correct National Geographic. It said a few years ago, in 2009, that life evolves through chance, the unpredictable intervention of countless accidents. Chance has reared its head many times in our planet's history. The next article.
So it wasn't the intermediate forms reasoning it out, huh?
No, apparently not to National Geographic's.
Somebody just wanted
The next article, he compares it to the lottery, which we recognize the odds there. If you go to 23, this article says we happen to naturally emerge in a universe that can just barely sustain life against huge obstacles and tremendous odds. The theologian, of course, doesn't like the sound of this chancy luckiness. Life is unimportant, purposeless, and meaningless from the grand cosmic perspective. And so it's, according to these evolutionists, it's just chance, luck. But this fellow doesn't think it was. He reasoned it out.
Jeff, talk to me.
Well, since we were in school, the electron microscope was a new invention when we were all in school. Now it's just old hat, and the electron microscope has revealed the information that could not be seen. And Michael Behe wrote that book, Darwin's Black Box, meaning he was referring to the human cell. Darwin couldn't see into the cell. It was 100 years later before we could see inside the cell. I mentioned the term irreducible complexity a moment ago. Take a mousetrap. You've got to have the trigger, which holds the bait, and then you've got the spring and the lever that sets that, and then you've got a piece that you pull over and and clip to the trigger. Right? Now, and then the foundation on which it sits, that's your mousetrap. A mousetrap will not work if any one of those parts is missing. They all have to be present at the same time for a mousetrap to exist. This is the case with so many features of the human body, as well as various organisms, even the smallest organisms. And to argue that these were created over time with gradual changes and modifications is absolutely absurd. There would be no reason whatsoever for these things to exist. It's like saying we went out to my Uncle Herman's farm where there was every piece of junk in the world, and then all of a sudden a wind came along and there was a robot out of all that junk. No. Those things had to all be present at one time. They could not evolve. And so the only explanation for that is intelligence design, creation, which created the various kinds and then instilled in them what Genesis describes as each be fruitful and multiply after its own kind. And you never see cats becoming dogs. We're talking about the constraints of the genome earlier that Alan mentioned. He's bred dogs. He's never gone out there and put those bulldogs together and then however long the gestation period is for a bulldog and had a litter of cats born. That's not what happens, but that's exactly what they would have to argue. That dinosaur laid an egg one day and it hatched a chicken.
Your illustration about your Uncle Herman's farm isn't exactly accurate. It wouldn't have taken one. No, it wouldn't have taken one windstorm. The first windstorm would have just knocked a couple of gears together. Then those couple of gears, according to these dudes, would have figured it out that was better than one gear alone. And then the next time there'd have been a couple of rods. The next windstorm there would have been something else blown in there. Of course, all of this while it's 2 gears together not doing anything and can't reason anything out. There would have to been thousands of windstorms and thousands of gears knocked together.
Yep.
And that's not even really complex enough for a lot of things. The human eye, for instance.
There's really a Bible passage that makes this point for us, I think. Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 3, beginning, it says, "For Jesus is considered worthy of more glory than Moses, just as the builder has more honor than the house. Not every house is built by someone, but the one who built everything is God." We can look at the crudest built house. I mean, just consider a lean-to. And you out in the woods, you see a lean-to, the wind didn't create that. It was intelligence that designed all that, put it together.
Ronnie, Alan, they got you involved as a dog breeder here. Do you want to share anything else with us?
Well, Jeff mentioned a minute ago the idea of irreducible complexity, and that was Behe's argument from his Darwin's Black Box. You recall that book that was very popular, and Lord, they have attacked that book with considerable venom over the years, trying to disprove it. And they're later one of their arguments goes, well, we've got a lot of supposedly junk DNA or junk genes in our DNA that are churning out all sorts of chemicals, supposedly, and all those chemicals churning out, well, sometimes they come together in different combinations to give us some sort of a useful function. And so when we see something like the eye, for example, or clotting blood that requires a chain of some dozen or more biochemical reactions that have to occur in sequence and in the proper proportion, why, that all came about accidentally because our bodies are constantly churning out these proteins and chemicals to potentially make some evolutionary change. And I'm going, when we read that, we have to kind of shake our heads. We've got We've got extra molecules floating around in our body that might do God knows what at any given time.
I met some of those people.
I believe I have too. But the bottom line is that what survival benefit is it to have the body churning out random chemicals, random proteins, random components even of cells, with the idea that, well, maybe in some way we'll roll up a good combination and we'll suddenly have some kind of maybe superpower or something.
Well, I'd also like to know though. Then how is it that the human body or the species or whatever is then able to decide that's beneficial and maintain that? You know,
Yeah.
I've been in the kitchen cooking and thrown a bunch of stuff together and thought, hey, that tastes pretty good. Well, if I didn't write the recipe down,
How would you do it the next time?
how would I do it the next time?
Yeah, for instance, as Alan said, if it takes 12 different reactions, how did the body know those first 2 were going to lead to something when the next 10 came along?
Where I come from, that's just a good way to get yourself blown up.
Well, the idea,
Alan,
yes.
since you're the bulldog expert, isn't it true that bulldogs have to be delivered, the pups, by C-section?
That's correct. They have to be delivered by cesarean.
So bulldogs wouldn't survive in nature, would they?
They would not.
That's not necessarily true, since I have bulldogs too.
Oh, okay.
The pups are so valuable that you wouldn't, let's say you've got 5 pups, they would survive in nature, but you wouldn't get all 5 of them out of the mother healthy. They have been bred to that point that they couldn't throw the 5 usually in a healthy manner. They could probably reproduce their species, but it would be harder. And they're so valuable that Alan likes to pay for the C-section instead of lose pups. But I see your point. You're saying that they've been bred to almost to the point where they can't naturally.
Yeah. There's a limit. That goes back to what Alan said earlier. There's a limit on what even us, as we use our intelligence, can produce. And nature, by accident, is going to be far less than that.
Yeah, while you're on that illustration, I happen to raise chickens, and I don't want to get into many more chicken illustrations. Don't get me involved, but a lot of chickens have been bred to the point, to where they're raised in cages and so forth, that the brooding instinct is gone from them. They just don't have it anymore. And so if you were to turn some of those breeds of chickens loose out in the wild, they wouldn't know what to do. The instinct to brood the eggs, to sit on the eggs, turn the eggs, keep them warm and so forth is gone. They bred it out of them. Just so they'll sit in a cage and lay eggs and they roll out and you and I eat them for breakfast. But I don't think nature did that. We did that.
And both the creationists as well as the evolutionists would say that dogs are related to the wolves. But I don't think you wind up mating a bulldog and a poodle and wind up with a wolf, because there's loss of information, not the gaining of information, which would be required from the evolutionary standpoint.
And that was exactly my point earlier. They deny the presence of that information. And when you have these mutations occur, that's what happens. The loss of information takes place. There's not anything that they're observing that is an increase of information. The whole, we live in a broken world as a result of sin, and the world has continued on as it does, but we have diseases, we have sickness, we have disabilities, all of these things that arise, and it's why cloning doesn't work. you don't make a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. There's the loss of information. Well, my question is, where did the information come from in the first place? And if we it's not in nature, because their whole argument is nature is just dispassionate and it's not intelligent.
There you go. Okay, Ronnie, you started us off tonight on this particular area. You want to finish this up?
Well, I think we covered a lot of things. We might go back to, before I got on the program, I was on the elliptical, and I usually read while I'm on there. And
how do you do
that? You can do that.
I can't. I would be breathing so hard I couldn't read anything.
Anyway.
Bad for you.
Yeah. As an educator, I get the American Biology Teacher magazine, and there's an article in it. Of course, the new science standards are out, and part of that is teaching the nature of science. And this particular article was talking about that, and I'll just read this sentence here. He says, teachers and students alike benefit from moving beyond the textbook and even the classroom itself and immersing themselves in how to assess the biological claims that inform our choices as citizens and consumers. So, he talks about the students here assessing or weighing the claims of biology, and I think we would agree with that. But in the same article, he then makes the point when he talks about climate change that, well, students, and this is a quote, students are not expert enough to weigh the evidence themselves.
But they're supposed to assess.
Yes. And
that's
evolution,
not what I want to do.
Evolution contradicts itself going back and forth.
Yeah.
So that's a good example of it.
All righty. Let me get set back up here and we'll move on. We did get a comment from somebody, Jeff, I think, that was mostly saying hi to you. He did comment about all the hot air coming from Katy, Texas. But I'm sure that referred to the warmth of the climate that you're in.
Yeah.
Any personal comments you were making. All righty,
just because it's hot air doesn't mean it's not true.
That's true. That's true. So let me go. Before I get to the next question or comment or whatever we're going to come up with, I would like to remind you that you can reach us. 2 or 3 of these people have reached us. That guy about the hot air reached us, and the commenter about our evolutionary point. But you can reach us by responding here on chat. You can call us, 317-257-3000. We'll get you on the air. You can reach us at 1-800-423-2484, and we'd like very much to talk with you if you would just do those things. Again, this particular segment, as we have looked for what's going on here, is this the truth or is it a fib? We'd have to admit that once you put it on the truth meter, is that true? We would have to say that no, it's they've reached one of those pants on fire moments, and they're just not going to make it here. Again, if you hear something,
you need to add some animation to that chart.
Well, that's true. I'm not as good at that as other people are. I just think.
Oh, I remember some shotguns.
Well, I didn't do those. Somebody else did those. Well, I may have found some of them. Let me remind you, we do appreciate these segments. We don't come up with them ourselves usually. If you hear a preacher, if you see a scientific article that relates to the scriptures, if you read an article from somebody, if you see YouTube, so many different ways I've had people that have written me that were riding in their car and they heard it and they say, hey, I heard Joe Schmo here at 8 o'clock on channel whatever it is, and he said this, and look it up. And so I've gone back and looked it up as possible, and we've commented on that. Is it true? You may hear some questionable things. You want to know, is that in fact the case? We're going to go back to our phone back now and see what's coming up there, I think. Let's give it a whirl.
Well, hey, I'm driving around right now. I'm on duty, and I've just been put to the station to Percha. I have no idea who you are or what you're about, but I had a question that came to my mind. I know if you can help me with the verse, I'm not sure of the address. It says in the last days, the latter days, that many shall come in my name, but they'll be false. I'm not sure of the specific verse, but I was wondering if being in the last days, I know that Christ is referred to as the Word, and He is the Word, that if that could be attributed to all the different versions of the Bible today, that in the last days many shall come in His name. Because I know I'm a Christian, but I know there's 50 versions of the Bible today, and which one's correct and all that. That's kind of the line of my question there.
All righty. Jeff, we're going to start with you. Have you found that verse yet?
Well, I think he's referring to Matthew 24, many will come in my name, which we could talk about that at length, but the point I think I would make about it is that there have always been false prophets and there will always be false prophets, and I think that was Jesus' point both in Matthew 24 as well as his previous statements in Matthew 17 and Matthew 15. These purveyors of error with regard to creation and so forth are an example of that. Does that mean that we are entering into a time where we can now expect the end of the world? Well, the New Testament is written from the standpoint of our being ready. And that's even the message that Jesus gives in Matthew 25 when he talks about the servants. And he describes one who was faithful and another one who was unfaithful. And when the Lord came at an hour in which they were not prepared, he had not announced his coming, then the faithful servant was rewarded and the unfaithful servant was punished. So to the caller, I would say the main concern he ought to have is to determine whether or not he himself is a faithful servant. I'm not necessarily suggesting that he's not, but that's his responsibility. Am I truly a faithful servant of Christ? I don't have to worry about when Jesus is going to come because I am going to be ready. What is it that Milliner is doing?
Pardon?
He talked about translations. This is the Queen James Bible.
Oh.
The Queen James Bible? Oh, my goodness.
People don't like what the Bible says, they can put out their own Bible.
Yeah.
Isn't that what the Jehovah's Witnesses did?
I think that's what the whole new translation craze is about, especially in the Study Bible thing. Anyway, is they used to you had the creed and then you had the Bibles. Now you've got the creed in the Bible, so called.
Yeah.
All righty. Matthew 24:5. Many shall come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and shall lead many astray. Many shall come in my name, saying, I am he, and shall lead many astray. That's in the same passage in Mark 13. Again, the same rough passage in Luke 21. We'll go on to another comment. We're looking forward to hearing from you. 257-3000.
You did connect that with different translations. Could that be what Jesus was talking about? I don't think that's what he was talking about. But there are so-called translations out there that have false teaching in them. And so one does need, as I think we talked about last week in 1 John 4, test the spirits. We've gotten to the point where we almost need to test the Bibles. that are out there to make sure that they are accurate translation and presenting the truth of God.
Alan, can you recommend some Bibles to us? Some Bibles you feel confident about? Translations?
I generally think the modern King James is fairly good. They've gotten rid of a lot of the sort of Elizabethan language or earlier language out of the King James version and put it in more modern terminology. Some of the revised versions, things like the American Standard, are pretty good. One thing you got to be careful on those is that they rely on a couple of guys called Westcott and Hort, who had a fairly limited view of what they thought should be considered scriptural, or at least canonical, and so they tended to exclude some things. But generally, those translations will work pretty well, I think.
All righty. What's he talking about there, Jeff? About that Westcott and Hort thing? What's all that about?
Well, that's the American Bible Society's text today is what is generally regarded as a Westcott and Hort text. It comes through that tradition, where the oldest texts that were in existence in the 19th century were the foundation of the Westcott and Hort. There were more texts than what were available in 1611, and through that process of criticism, the older manuscripts were given greater credence or weight, and so because there were certain verses like Mark 16 or Acts 8 or John 8, I think it is, that did not occur in that 3rd or 4th century manuscript, then Westcott and Hort assumed, well, that doesn't belong in the Bible. Same thing would be said about Revelation 20. But the reality is, and I'm a firm believer in a majority text, and that text is always growing, but the reality is that the New Testament church did not exist for a period of 2,000 years without a copy of the Bible or the New Testament. The Hebrew text has been shown over and again, particularly with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that the traditional Masoretic text, which the King James is based on, is a good text. They haven't found anything that contradicts that text, the traditional Hebrew text. Likewise, the Greek text that the church had in its possession at the time the King James translation was made in 1611 was based upon newer manuscripts, but those newer manuscripts were based on manuscripts that were much older than even some that Westcott and Hort had opportunity to have access to. And so, frankly, I personally believe, and I'm willing to let somebody try and prove otherwise, but I haven't had anybody do it yet, I personally believe what we call the Textus Receptus, or the received text, is as good a text as could possibly be desired for a basis of translation. And when you add to that the later discoveries of the 20th and now in the 21st century, I read the other day there was a couple more that had been found, partial copies, that we still have not discovered anything in 300 years, practically, over 200 years of textual criticism based on Westcott and Hort. We haven't found anything that significantly undermines the translation of the King James. Now, if we're talking about English and grammar, that's one thing. But if we're talking about the foundation text of the King James Bible is as accurate as any text the church has ever possessed. I believe that with all my heart.
All righty, Ronnie. Alan mentioned some translations he thought were good and reliable. You said that there were some. You guys have mentioned a couple. What would you say would be unreliable, or at least questionable, or need to be careful about?
Well, on a kind of a general guideline, be careful of one-man translations.
Paraphrase.
Be careful of translations that are put out by a particular group or religious belief, like We mentioned the Jehovah's Witnesses. Their
New World.
New World Translation.
okay.
New World Translation.
And
Give me some
paraphrases.
Give me some examples
about
of
paraphrase.
Excuse me. Give me some examples of one-man translations.
I think of Williams right off.
Yeah, Williams, Goodspeed.
Phillips.
Yeah.
Knox.
Yeah. Now go ahead. I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Well, the last thing I think I mentioned was paraphrases, like the Living Bible.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know what the difference is between a translation and a paraphrase. What is that?
Well, a translation, and there's actually a difference in translation, but translation tries to present the word-for-word meaning of the text.
The Greek text.
Yeah, if you was taking a book written in Spanish, you would want to try to translate it word for word so that you know what was being written in the Spanish. Where a paraphrase, the idea is it's going to take what the writers believe is the thought, or kind of I wouldn't say summary, but just expressing what they think the idea is in other words. So it's not a literal word-for-word type of translation.
All righty. Give me a couple of examples of that.
Like I said, the Living Bible, I think there's a newer version called Living Message.
Those are some of the popular ones, various.
There was, you remember the Cotton Patch Bible?
Yeah.
That's a paraphrase for sure. There's another issue in translation today, and that's this concept of dynamic equivalence.
Okay, what's that?
And the idea is they try to here's something that's translated, and it comes into English, and we've all heard the expression, well, it loses something in the translation. And that's perhaps because it culturally, in the Hebrew or the Greek, it had some meaning, or it rang with the listener in such a way as that culturally it had a meaning to him. Whereas in English it doesn't have that. And we know of things in the Bible, for example, the 119th Psalm is an alphabetic psalm in the Hebrew language. It is not alphabetic in our Bibles because English characters do not correspond to Hebrew, the alphabet. So it loses all of that. And so there are things that are lost in translation. But the translator needs to be careful that he does not assume the role of the reader. I don't want him telling me what something means. I want the opportunity to figure it out for myself. And so it may be that it loses something in the translation, but as the reader, I have the responsibility to figure that out, not for him to tell me what it means. And there's where the problem of dynamic equivalence. That sort of thing needs to be in the footnotes and clearly we understand that that's an area where he may have to do further study.
Okay, Jeff, while I've got you on camera, we're about done. Where is it you're worshiping down there in Texas?
I'm worshiping with the brethren that meet over on Fry Road. That's a good church. It's been there a good while. It's had some great preachers. Roy Cogdell preached there and was a member there when he died. Harold Fite preached there for a long time. Bob Pulliam is the preacher there now, and Bob does a great job in the pulpit. I'm really enjoying sitting under him and learning. We've got 5 really good men who are elders. I've known one of them for most of my life. He and his wife, they're wonderful people. But all of the elders are diligent. Reuben Amador is one of our elders, and Reuben has been so active for, almost my entire life, working since he was a young man at the time of his conversion, working among the Spanish-speaking. We're very active in helping him travel and continue that work. It's a good church.
All right, Ronnie, tell us where you're worshiping over there.
Stafford Church in Stafford, Virginia. I do occasionally do some preaching around about. I'm going to be up in Maryland at the end of this month and back down West End in Richmond the first Sunday in March. So
Where are you going to be in Maryland?
I knew you'd ask that.
You got
I
this
can't remember.
down somewhere, right?
I can't remember the name of it.
Is it on a paved road?
Yes, it's on a page. It's barely. It's not a line. It's not a lined road.
Alan, what are you going to be teaching about Sunday morning?
We are continuing in the book of Genesis. We're talking about Jacob and Esau and about Jacob's deception in order to gain the birthright and gain the blessing from his father.
All righty. Tomorrow night, this program is brought to you by the High School Road Church of Christ, 3103 North High School Road in Indianapolis, Indiana. We're going to be meeting tomorrow night at 7:30, and yours truly is going to be teaching in the book of Acts. We'd love to have you come out and be with us. I appreciate your participation today. Appreciate you fellas and all the work you did on this evolution question and your other comments. And if the Lord wills, we'll be back again Tuesday morning at 10, class in Luke. And we hope you'll come out and be with us at one of those occasions. Good day to you. Thursday?